When you're a new writer, sometimes the hardest thing to do is to let someone else read your writing. But this is something that you have to do. So I'm going to suggest that if you're a new writer, you should join a critique group. Welcome to the Julia Amante channel. If we're just meeting, I am Julia Amante. I'm a women's fiction author, and today we're going to talk about critique groups and why it's a good idea to join one. So long ago, when I first started writing, and I didn't know anything, I didn't really know what I should do, if my writing was any good. I didn't know anything, right? So I decided to join a local writers organization, and part of that organization was that they had a critique group. So every chapter was different. Some of them had critique groups, some of them didn't. So I actually joined two of them. One of them just had guest speakers, which was really cool. So I got to go and listen to writers talk and learn about writing and learn about building my skills. And the other one was mostly just a critique group. So we would get together once a month and then we would share our work. But when I first went, I had no idea. I had no idea really what a critique group was. So I went, and when I got there, it felt like I was back in school. So we all sat around this table, and so one of the authors passed out her chapter, and then we were instructed to just start reading. And so we would read, and then after we were finished reading, then everybody kind of took turns critiquing the work and saying what worked and what didn't work. And when we finished that one, then the next person passed out her chapter, and I thought it was really bizarre, and I thought a lot of the comments seemed very negative. And I thought, when I left there, I thought, this is really weird. I don't really know if I want to do this, because it's supposed to inspire you, and you're supposed to feel better when you leave your critique group, right? So you're supposed to go home and be more inspired to write, because I really didn't understand what the purpose of the critique group was. So I went home and I was talking to my husband about it, and I was like, oh, this is really weird. And I really felt bad for the writers, because they kind of like really chopped up her writing. And he's like, well, give it some time, maybe go back and see what it's like. So I thought, okay, I'll go back. So I went back. And I got to know really what the whole point of the critique group was. And I understood, right, that the criticism was really to help the writer get better, that there is no help by just telling the writer that everything looks good, because then there's no help, right? So not that you want to do it nicely, obviously, you don't want to be mean-spirited about it, but you want to give that writer some feedback so that they really can make their story better. So over time, and it took me a long time, it probably took me about a year before I actually allowed them to read my work. I was brave enough, right, to actually take a chapter and have them read it. So they would ask, who wants to submit next time? You haven't submitted anything. Are you interested, Julia? I'm like, no, I'm okay. So I would go and I would read other people's stuff, but I didn't really submit mine until about a year later. And then once I did, right, I was more confident in my work, and I knew them better, right? So I felt better with the group, which is one of the things that you want to do, is you want to be able to feel comfortable with the people that you're with. So what I'm going to talk about is just some kind of like critique group etiquette, and let you know why it's a good idea for you to join one or to find a critique group for your work. The first reason why a critique group is important is because it really does help you to improve. So when somebody else, right, and a different reader looks at your work, they will see things that you don't see, things that you hadn't thought of. So sometimes somebody will say something and you'll actually get this aha moment, like, oh, I didn't think of doing that, or yeah, the character is acting bizarre, or whatever, right? So this makes you, it opens up your eyes so that when you go home, you can rethink your story. So just having somebody else's perspective is really the first reason, and maybe the most important reason. It's just to get other people to read your work, right? So be open to what they're saying, because that one person's opinion, it is just one person's opinion, but it also could represent many other people who are going to see it similar to that one reader. Okay, so the first reason is just that, just to have exposure, to have other people read your work. Okay, and something else to keep in mind is when you do go to a critique group, when you do turn in your chapter, your scene, whatever it is that they're going to read, is to when they are critiquing your work, listen to what they're saying. And don't try to defend your work, because if it's not clear in the writing, then that means it's not clear. Okay, so a lot of times we want to defend ourselves. I remember one time when they were saying that one of my heroines was unsympathetic, like they didn't like her, right? And I thought, well, don't they get it? Like, she was hurt, and she's experienced all this pain, and she's not a jerk. She's just going through all this. Well, no, they didn't get it, because I didn't make that clear. I didn't make it clear in the writing that this is why she's acting this way, right? I'm just expecting the reader to figure it out. Well, what they weren't figuring it out, and then by having them read it, I realized that I need to rewrite this, because otherwise she is sounding unsympathetic, and the reader is not going to like her. And if the reader doesn't like the character in the book, they're really not going to like the book, right? So I need to make sure that I'm clear. And if I'm not clear in the story, I don't need to verbally tell them, well, no, you don't understand, it's because of this. It doesn't matter. I need to make it clear in the writing, not verbally, because when somebody buys my book and reads my book, I'm not going to be there to explain it to them, right? So this is important for you to listen and not try to defend what was there. Just listen and say, well, does it make sense what they're saying? Do I need to fix something? And then you go home and change it if you want to. Okay, and related to that, try not to take what people say personally. And this is assuming that the people in your critique groups are nice people, right? So that they're not intentionally trying to hurt you. They're not intentionally trying to, cut your book into pieces and shreds, and they're just not mean-spirited people. They're really just trying to help each other. Everybody there is trying to help each other. So if you find that that's not true, like somebody is being intentionally mean or jealous or whatever you feel, then I guess you need a new critique group, right? You need to leave that group and find somebody else. But assuming that you like them, that you believe that they're there to help you, then don't take what they're saying personally, because it's not an attack on you. It's just trying to help you actually get better and do a better job with your novel. So just take a step back, say, this is, they're not critiquing me. It's not a personal attack. It's just about the story, whether the story makes sense to them, whether they like it, whether it captivates them, whether they want to read more, or whether, there's issues with grammar or whatever the problem is that they may find. So again, don't take it personally. Just, say thank you and then move on. And then it is your story, which is my next point, is when you get home, this is your story. If you disagree with what they say, or you think they didn't get it for whatever reason, you don't have to change anything. It's up to you. So take what they say, think about it, be kind of open-minded and fair. But in the end, it's your story. And if you think that they're taking you in a different direction, or they're suggesting that you write something that you weren't intentionally trying to write, so basically they're rewriting your story to fit how they think the story should go, well, then you don't want to do that. You want to stay true to your story. You just want to fix things that are a problem that make your story better, not change the story to fit somebody else's idea of what the story is like, okay, or what the story should be. So basically, you want to be with a critique group for as long as you feel that it's helpful. It doesn't mean that you have to be part of a critique group forever. So sometimes what tends to happen is that the writers all get so comfortable with each other, right, that you start to write for the critique group rather than writing for your reader. So you start thinking as you're writing, oh, is so-and-so going to like my book, my story, or what's Mary going to think about this, or what's, right? So if you're doing that, if you find yourself that at some point you're actually writing for the critique group, then it's probably time to leave the critique group. Not because anybody's doing anything wrong, but just because you want to remember that you're writing for your readers and not for that group. So it starts to not be helpful if you're just only thinking about what these people are saying. Okay, so that's something just to keep in mind, that there will come a time. I'm no longer part of the critique group that I started with, and for me, it was more that the vision. After a while, I got published. So I think that early work with the critique group was very helpful, because it did help me understand that I am right for many people, and I do need to take other people's opinions into consideration. But eventually, once I got published, I started working with my editor, and I started to notice that her vision of what I should be writing was different from what my critique group was recommending. So my critique group would say something, and then I would write it, and then my editor would say, well, why are you doing this? And I wouldn't say it, but I would think, well, because my critique group seemed to like that. But my editor obviously did not like it, and it wasn't the vision of what she thought I needed to write for that publishing house. If that makes sense. So at that point, I thought, okay, so this isn't really helping me anymore. I just kind of, I have my agent, and she's giving me her opinion, and I have my editor, and she's giving me her opinion. And it was to my benefit to, not write just what they wanted, but to understand what it is that they were telling me at that point, because that was sort of the next growth. As a writer, you're growing each time. So you're taking one step, and that is part of your growth, and then you're taking the next step and the next step. And so when you're working with a publisher, you want to make sure that you are meeting that line's expectations or that publisher's expectations. And at that point, it was time for me to move on. So one of the things that you'll find is that eventually you might find that too, right? That you've kind of outgrown your critique group, and it's time for you to move on, or maybe find a different critique group. So I do think that it's an important part of the author growth. I do think that you should find a critique group to work with, and just stay with them as long as you think that it's helpful to you. All right, and the last thing is just, where do you find a critique group? So I found my critique group through this writers organization. So sometimes if you'll join a writers organization, they will have a critique group. There's also online critique groups that could be helpful. So that's an option, is just to go online and find critique groups and join a critique group online. I kind of like the face-to-face, but that might be helpful to you. You might go to maybe your local library, or you might go to even bookstores. Bookstores tend to have more like reader groups than writer groups, but sometimes they do have writer groups. And if you connect with these writer groups, you might just say, hey, all right, does anybody want to form a critique group, or is there a critique group that is part of this group? So there's a lot of options out there. There's a lot of writers, and I do think online is sort of the best as far as finding people. And then maybe if they're close, if they live close by, you can also meet in person and exchange things in person. I know now with Zoom and everything, it almost isn't necessary, but I did like the kind of the in-person of actually going there and sitting together and being, just being with the group and reading and talking about it in person. Because sometimes with Zoom, we try to follow protocol, right? And so we try to not interrupt people. So one person is speaking the next, but when you're in together as a group, like sometimes like somebody will say something and somebody else will nod and say, yeah, I thought the same thing, or I felt the same thing, or I really liked when the heroine did this. So sometimes it's just a different vibe when you're working in person with people. But there's lots of places to look for a critique group, and I suggest that you do find one. And I hope that this is helpful for you, and I hope that you consider it, because I do think that it really does add to you as a writer. It does help you grow as a writer. So thank you for being here. If this was helpful, please hit the like button and share this with other writer friends. And I'll see you again next Friday.